Morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us today. We're so pleased to have you. I'm especially pleased to be part of a very exciting webinar today, speaking about World Refugee Day, which is just coming up in a matter of days. You're going to learn much more about it. My name is Christina Tobias Nahi from Islamic Relief USA, but today I'm wearing my other hat as an advisory member of the G20 Interfaith. And as always, we want to thank them for hosting this and so many wonderful events on so many topics pertaining to the SDGs and bringing in a faith lens. We invite you to visit to learn more about the G20 Interfaith, as well as those various working groups at g20interfaith.org. And the particular group today, of which I'm also a part, that is hosting the webinar is the Refugee Displacement and Migration Group. And we hope that this will encourage you to become more involved as we move forward in this work, because as we know, and we're about to hear, we're at a really tipping point in the refugee crisis around the world. We're also kind of coming to you at a sad time. As we know, there was just a large sinking of a migrant boat in Greece, and they are now in 3 days of mourning. They had nearly 80 bodies who have been retrieved and hundreds who are still missing in the seas there. And so we want to, keep them and their families in our prayers. And this is coming off of, another tragic event just a couple of weeks ago, also off the coast of Greece, where they were caught on video that some migrants had been turned away at sea. So we want to, look into this. We're not here to talk about Greece or any other country particularly. This is a crisis all around the world. You'll be hearing more personal stories. Islamic Relief, we have our own office in Greece. We have that in partnership with HIAS, the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, where we are receiving those who are able to come on shore and who can claim asylum. And we work with them in a pro bono legal clinic. And actually I have a photo behind me from Lesbos, Greece, from that camp. But before further ado, we had 3 wonderful speakers today. I'm not going to go into their full bios because we are going to put them in the chat for you. But in order of appearance, it's going to be Mandy Lindner, who is in charge of U.S. public engagement at the United Nations, HCR, High Commissioner of Refugees, here in the Washington, D.C. area, and going to be presenting some slides and giving you some background information, followed by 2 community organizers who also have refugee experiences of their own. That is Asila Borno also from Islamic Relief USA, and then Ahmed, also from UNHCR. So we have such a wonderful panel lined up. We hope that this will be a very interactive experience. We will invite you, while you're listening to these personal testimonies, to send us messages in the question and answer, as well as any questions, and we will get to those at the end. So without further ado, Mandy, I would love to pass this on to you to set the stage.
Thank you so much. First, I want to thank everybody for joining us and for the G20 Interfaith Forum IF20 for inviting us to speak today. Faith-based organizations are some of our most important partners because when crises happens or resettlement, needs to happen, refugees are on the ground and they need things. Faith-based partners are always the first to step up and say, how can we help? Whether it's providing in-kind donations or item drives. It's just really important partnerships, not just across the US where sort of my work takes place, but all across the globe. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us and being here and allowing us the time to talk about refugee issues and World Refugee Day coming up, which is hopefully a little more lighthearted, or at least more in honor of the recognition of all the good work taking place. So I'm going to share my screen here. I just have a few slides to sort of guide the conversation as I share a little bit more about what we do, UNHCR, and what we've been seeing recently and some of the global trends of displacement. So about UNHCR, we don't have, a lot of brand recognition across the US as much as we do globally. So I do want to at least provide a little overview if anybody is unaware of who we are. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees began in 1950 in the aftermath of World War II. Really where Europe was seeing a large amount of refugees and saying this is going to take some time to repatriate and let people go home safely to their homes. And so our mandate was really meant to last they thought about 3 years. And then the refugees would be back home. And obviously, as Christina was introducing at the start of this webinar, crises continue to happen all over the world. And now we currently work in 134 countries. We have over 20,000 staff, the majority of whom work on the ground in the fields when those crises are happening. So UNHCR really has the mandate has grown to provide protection and assistance to the world's refugees and anybody who has been forcibly displaced due to violence, war, or persecution, and really help them find safety, make sure that they can claim asylum, and then return home when it is safe, or resettle in a third country if they're unable to return home. So we serve refugees, those who have fled war, violence, or persecution and crossed an international border to find safety, asylum seekers who are seeking that international protection and have, there's usually legalities involved in becoming a refugee through a nation's process once asylum seekers have claimed asylum. Internally displaced persons, I think this is the largest category, people who have not crossed a border but can't be at home where they are in their own home country. So they're seeking safety within their country's borders. And then stateless people. These are usually people who don't have citizenship or legal rights within any country in the world. So it comes with its own difficulties and lack of protection. And so we work with those people as well. So we just released this past Tuesday our 2022 Global Trends Report. So these are the numbers up through the end of 2022. Just all of the asylum seekers, internally displaced, refugees, and stateless persons across the world. We try and count them every year so that we know who they are, where they're coming from, where they're going to, and really trending some of the issues that we're seeing around the world, the conflicts, where we see the majority of cases, but then also where we see some issues developing, whether it's being able to claim asylum or whether it's conflicts that are heating up. Last year, unfortunately, we saw the highest ever annual increase in these numbers, more than 19 million people. That was a lot of it, of course, driven by wars in Ukraine, ongoing civil unrest in Syria, South Sudan, etc. This video, I'm not going to play it, and I will share the link in the chat when I'm done presenting of all these things I'm going to be talking about. But this URL will go to that Global Trends Report. It's 48-page report, and it deep dives into all of these numbers. I'm going to share some of the top line in a minute, but you can download it and use it and read it yourself. But this video and the video here is on that website. It provides a really wonderful about 6-minute overview of some of these top line numbers, but really also explains where people are coming from, why they're fleeing, what we're seeing kind of this year in these trends. So what are we seeing? Last year, we unfortunately crossed the 100 million marker of forcibly displaced people worldwide. Again, that was driven largely by Ukraine as far as reaching that 100 million number. And that has just continued to grow over the course of 2022. So our number is 108.4 million. However, you will see on our social media channels, we were saying over 110 million because unfortunately we're in June, so we're already halfway through 2023. And due to increased violence in South Sudan, and other places around the world, we are seeing even more. That number has grown to over 110 million. So that's why you will see, I just wanted to explain, that's why you will see the discrepancy in what we're promoting even now, 6 months into 2023. This is just the breakdown of our the people under our mandate, so refugees, internally displaced, asylum seekers, and stateless. This map just gives you a wonderful sort of one-shot overview of where people are coming from, countries where we're seeing increased people fleeing violence, war, or persecution. This chart is in the global trends, so you don't have to screenshot it or memorize it. But just to say that for the countries that are named, it's because they are in the top 5 among their largest population group of either arrivals, refugees who have fled to those countries and where they are being hosted, or people fleeing from those countries and in need of international protection. So the red and the blue bubbles is indicated. So just kind of to show you where the hotspots are in this in globally. Some demographic information. So those who are forced to flee largely fall 50-50 male and female, but I share this chart because it's really important to indicate that 40% of those forcibly displaced are children under the age of 18. I think this is lowered a bit because of the war in Ukraine and how some of the numbers have shifted. But a couple of years ago, children represented over 50% of those who have been forced to flee. So it's not an easy thing as a child to flee and end up in a refugee camp and a lot of times being raised there. So we just want to indicate that, children are heavily impacted by war, violence, and persecution. Over 52% of those forced to flee come from just 3 countries: Syria, Ukraine, and Afghanistan. I'm sure many on the call, you can probably guess that, but it's just a stark number that we must share to know where, again, these crises are taking place. And really important to note with the upcoming Global Refugee Forum in December is that 76% of those hosting countries are low and middle income countries. So these are countries where refugees are forced to flee to. Think of, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey. 76% of these countries are they themselves low and middle income. So, high income countries are not bearing the brunt of these crises, despite what you may see in the media, right? And so it's really important when we talk about the Global Refugee Forum that we talk about sharing that responsibility, that the borders may be closer, so that's where refugees are being hosted, but the funds, the support, the solidarity can come from higher income countries. The solutions, when we talk about resettlement, can come from higher income countries so that low and middle income countries aren't just bearing that burden alone. So that's what we talk about a lot and what you'll see a lot of communication being about as we get closer to the Global Refugee Forum. In the US, since that's where I'm based and my work takes place here in Washington, D.C., I just like to share a little information about the US that, we have seen. I think it's a 3-fold increase in asylum cases at the border. Obviously, a lot of that is the ending of the COVID-19 pandemic as people have more freedom of movement. But we have seen increased cases of asylum at the borders of the US. So that's where a lot of our numbers come from here in this country, and what we work with a lot is not necessarily, internally displaced, of course. We do have stateless persons in the US as well, and refugees, but we're seeing the highest numbers of asylum seekers, which leads to different, legal ramifications when we're talking about case management. Also in the US, I'm happy to say, though, we are one of the top resettlement countries, countries that receive refugees for resettlement. So these are refugees that may be living in camps or have fled to their second country for safety. And then the US is their 3rd or sometimes 4th or 5th, depending on their journey, country where they are resettled and given a home and safety for the long term, a durable solution, we like to say. Canada this year beat us out. So this is from the 2022 Global Trends. So if anybody's from Canada, congratulations. I know it was a very welcome news, but hopefully these numbers continue to increase as we welcome more and more refugees into our communities. Because I'm going to talk about World Refugee Day this year is really our theme this year is providing hope away from home. So whether you're a country that's hosting refugees who have recently fled, or refugees who are being resettled. It's really about including them in the decisions, the policy decisions that affect them. And this is why I invited Ahmed and Asil to join us, is to talk a little bit about what that looks like. But making sure that refugees are also included in the communities in which they are living. they are citizens. When they're resettled, they bring talents and hope and experience to wherever they go, and want to live productive lives just as any of us. So our theme is really focused on how we can do that, how we can give them access to the things they need in order to be included in our communities. So it's really focused on, this says solutions for refugees, but I like to also think solutions with refugees, because they can provide the perspective needed to make sure that those solutions work. And it's really about generating hope, that we can always do better. We can always provide more opportunity, but then also the stories and things that we're producing for World Refugee Day next week are really focused on driving toward that durable solutions conversation we're going to have at the Global Refugee Forum. How you can get involved. I don't want to make any hard asks because we're just here to learn right now at this webinar. I just want to say, and I can share our external toolkit, is that I think one of the most important asks I'm going to make today is that just helping us advocate, helping us share the message, raise awareness. I have here a link to share our content. I will share that information for a social media toolkit, just talking about who refugees are and why it's important that we support them is always more than enough, because that conversation doesn't happen all the time. So this is our moment, our key defining moment where we can have that conversation. If you have a Uniqlo store near you, just keep an eye out. We're having a global art contest for refugees and allies to design t-shirts with Uniqlo that will be sold in their stores. And then we do have a call to donate to our Aiming Higher Scholarship Fund, which is really a complementary pathway for refugees to access higher education across the world. If you are in the DC area, I know this doesn't apply to everybody, so I'm very sorry. I just wanted to share a few local events that we're having in Washington, DC this year for World Refugee Day, because the more the merrier. The first of which is another multi-faith celebration. So this is a little bit of a deeper dive talking about the role of faith-based organizations in supporting refugees. This is taking place on Capitol Hill at St. Mark's Episcopal Church. On Tuesday, World Refugee Day. In the evening, there'll be a reception and light refreshments and a panel discussion with the folks listed here, HIAS, IR, US Islamic Relief, and the Bishop of the Episcopal Church will be there. And so I just wanted to invite you, if you're in town. This I don't have a link to, so if you can screenshot this, or we can share the PowerPoint later. Just wanted to share the information so you have it if you're in town, or if you have representatives from your organizations who are in DC, feel free to share this information. And then our second event is the very next day, Wednesday on the 21st. Again, an evening reception, early evening reception in the Russell Senate office building. This is a congressional reception. Just to say that you do need to RSVP for security reasons. I will share that link in the chat. This one does have a URL. This is hosted by Senator Coons, and our UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador, Yusra Mardini, will be here. So Yusra's story, as I will also share in the next slide, Yusra is from Syria, who fled the Syrian crisis with her sister. And on their way, they also took a boat from Turkey to Greece, and on the way their boat started sinking. And Yusra and her sister Sarah are both national swimmers, Syrian national swimmers. And so they jumped out of the boat. This is profiled in a wonderful documentary I'll talk about in a minute, and helped swim the boat of refugees to the shores in Greece to safety for 3.5 hours overnight as the boat was sinking. An incredible story. So she'll be in DC sharing that story with our congressional representatives. And with an art installation with Artolution in the Capitol Rotunda. But the reception will be at the Russell Senate office building, bit.ly WRD reception. I will share this in the chat, so don't worry about it. Yusra will also be in town. I don't think she'll be in town on Friday. She's here through Thursday, but we're sharing her documentary at the Kennedy Center if you're in DC. These are free events. Mariella Shocker and Riyad Nicholas, her husband. Mariella is a world-renowned concert violinist, and her husband is her accompanist, but also a award-winning pianist. Both fled Syria when the war broke out. And I believe they came to the US as students to university as a complementary pathway mechanism. Met and married, and now they run their own music school. But they will be playing on the Millennium Stage at Kennedy Center at 6 p.m. And then we're all going to go outside, grab a blanket or a chair, and at the Reach, they have a video wall, the Kennedy Center, where they're going to play The Swimmers with a video introduction by Yusra. So The Swimmers is Yusra's story. It's not a full documentary. It's a scripted show or scripted film, but based on a true story. So you're welcome to join us if you can, or if you have representatives in DC, please share this information. Everybody is welcome. With that, this is just my brief overview of UNHCR. Again, I'll put the links in the chat, but I would love to hand it back over to Christina, who can introduce, I think more importantly, our Asil and Ahmed, who can share their stories, and we can hear directly from refugees who are working to provide solutions and policy and advocacy.
Thank you so much, Mandy. And yes, I've seen that very powerful film, The Swimmers, on Netflix. So I encourage those who can't make it in person to definitely see it streaming. It's such a powerful, powerful story. I wanted to, I love the theme of hope this year. And, again, for those not in the Washington, D.C. area, I am sure that within your state and in your city, because of, the various agencies that are resettling and those other NGOs and community-based and faith-based organizations that are supporting, there will be local activities as well. So I encourage you, to search in your local community what might be happening next week in honor of World Refugee Day. So the theme was hope, and I think this is a great opportunity to bring forth our next speakers. You mentioned, Mandy, the special vulnerability of children, the lifelong impacts, and how it shapes them. And I think these next two stories will be able to talk about that specifically. So Asil, I would love you to talk about your story, and then also how it shaped what you do now in terms of the advocacy work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina, and thank you so much, UNHCR, for inviting us and for giving us the opportunity to share our stories. So my name is Asil Borna, and I work for Islamic Relief as their advocacy campaign specialist. And I think that my refugee story brought me to my position today. It really was like the pathway and the end point. And so I am Palestinian. I was part of the second largest exodus of Palestinians in the history. The first one being in 1948 during the Nakba, when Palestinians were forcibly removed from their homes. And so it was 1990, I was about 7 years old, and Saddam Hussein decided to invade Kuwait. And it just so happened that the Palestinian government in Palestine was on the wrong side of that war, they decided. And because the 300,000 Palestinians that were living in Kuwait were just based on the fact that they were Palestinian, had no linkage to the PLO or otherwise, were told that they would have to be forcibly removed from the country. And so many did not have much choices. My family, we had my little brother, who at the time was 2 years old, was born in the United States. And so we were contacted by the US consulate, and they called, and my father picks up the phone, and the US government says, you have a US citizen in your family, and we would like to evacuate them out of Kuwait. He said, well, that US citizen is only 2 years old, so sorry, can't give him to you. And they're like, okay, sorry, well, we're only evacuating Americans at this time. 2 weeks pass by, and the war is getting more and more, violent. And I actually remember hiding underneath my little brother's crib as rockets were being launched over our home, because we lived very close to the Prince's Palace. And so 2 weeks pass by, and another phone call comes and says, we're actually going to evacuate your son and your entire family. We just need you to go. You get 2 suitcases and whatever you can carry. And with that, my family packed up their entire life. Both my parents were born in Kuwait, raised in Kuwait, went to university there, got married, raised their children. We were told to put our entire world into 2 suitcases and we didn't have access to the banks at the time. They were locked. And so whatever cash we had at home is what we were able to take with us. And I remember going to my father and saying, listen, I have these like 10 dinar. I hope I can help. 7 years old, thinking that my 10 dinar are going to help with this. And so we get on buses, and it's a whole group of us who are all Palestinians who happen to have one person in their family that happened to be an American-born citizen. And they take us on a flight. And I always say, at the time I didn't understand, but it's like, oh, we just landed in North Carolina, like a random thing. But later on, when I grew up, I realized that that's where they had decided to resettle us. And I think I became an ambassador from that point because I was one of the few children who could speak both Arabic and English. And so I was often assigned the role of help your fellow classmates who came from Kuwait with you because they're crying. They want their parents, and we have no idea what they're saying to us. And I would often translate between the teachers and the parents and the students. And I remember we were very, very lucky because my father was an engineer. Both my parents were bilingual. I had gone to international schools. So we were among the few families who were quickly sponsored by an employer. My father joined an engineering company, and then we got citizenship, a pathway to citizenship through that. However, most of the Palestinians that came with us may not have had that same level of education, may not have had the same language skills. And so they began the very painful process of trying to find a legal pathway of staying in the United States. If anyone is familiar with the refugee story of Mo Amer that came onto Netflix, it briefly documents his story. We were part of that group. And in his story, you can see it takes him decades before he even finds a legal pathway to citizenship. And I remember my father being the spokesperson for this group of Palestinians who had just arrived to the United States. He would speak to the media, he would write letters to representatives, and really, even though this was not his background, he's an engineer, but he knew that he had to be an advocate for those who could not speak the language, who could not express their needs, and were terrified. Brand new country, huge culture shock. Fast forward, I'm a freshman in college, and I'm studying business administration. I had just, I was like, I'm a pretty good writer. Let's see what business can do for me. And into the first month of my freshman year of college, 9/11 happened. And very quickly, growing up in North Carolina, knowing people all my life who assumed, because I did not veil, that I was white, and I would be sitting in lecture halls and would hear people say absolutely derogatory and racist things against Arabs and Muslims. And seeing my friends who were visibly Muslim get attacked on campus. I had a friend who was walking across campus and someone literally hurled a rock at her. And it had a huge shift in my thinking, and it really made me question what it was that I was doing. And I very quickly changed majors, and I became a political science major. And I started the first ever Middle East and North African Student Association on campus. And I think it's important for people to know that my generation that came during that time, we were the first to really start any kind of organizations on campus for Arabs, for Muslims. And I started my advocacy work really during that time, during those college years. And then once I graduated and I moved up to DC, I started a graduate program in political communication because I really wanted Arabs and Muslims across the United States to really be empowered to understand that their advocacy and their voice really matters, and to figure out how to get them on board, to figure out how they can make the most impact. And I worked for several organizations that are Muslim or Arab based, and I worked very closely with vulnerable communities and those who have left their homes against their will. Many people assume, oh, you're lucky that you've gone to leave your home country and now you've come to the United States. Well, unless you've come as an immigrant with the intention of migrating and starting a new life, coming as a refugee is really difficult. You're starting absolutely from zero. I mean, I remember growing up, the first few months that we were here, we were sleeping on the ground. There was no furniture. I had no toys. Everything that we got was from a refugee resettlement organization, used furniture, used toys, used everything. My mother, I think it took her about 20 years to really get over this very traumatic displacement. And she actually, when the Syrian war started, became one of the first to get on the ground and start helping people get resettled into their homes, actually bringing furniture, furnishing apartments, helping people fill out the many forms that you have to fill out in a different language, in a different country, in a different culture. So I grew up seeing both my mother and my father really truly being advocates for refugees. And now in this role that I have with Islamic Relief, it's a privilege because I get to push advocacy campaigns that really will try to help create policies that are more refugee friendly. And so we have two campaigns that we are trying to push this year. The first one being the Afghan Adjustment Act. We actually started last year trying to push this campaign. And in this campaign, we are trying to find a legal and quick pathway for citizenship for the Afghans that were our allies in Afghanistan who were evacuated in an emergency way. And they've come to the United States. Their status expires in August, and they still don't have a legal pathway to citizenship. And so in coalition with the Refugee Council USA, we are really trying to push and find a pathway to create an adjustment act so that the Afghans that came here, that helped us as allies to the United States, have a way to plant roots and to really feel final stability after so much instability and turmoil. So that's the first campaign. And then the second one is the Welcome Refugees 2023, to really push local legislators, state legislators, to tell the administration, the Biden administration, that we are ready to welcome more refugees. We have a lofty, goal of admitting about 300,000. We're not even close to a quarter of that, not even a third. And so we want state legislators to say, we're ready. We want refugees to come to our communities. They help our economies. They help our neighborhoods grow and thrive. And we have to uphold our promises, and we have to do it in a dignified manner and making sure that we are treating refugees as human beings. And so that's my full story. That's the full circle. I started as a refugee, and now I'm dedicating my life to helping those who are the most vulnerable. Thank you again.
Thank you, Aseel. I've heard that story before, but I'm always moved by it. And yeah, the imagery of you cowering under your brother's crib. I know our next speaker also came in the midst and the throes of conflict. So we're going to hear another story. Ahmed is also a community organizer, so I hope he will also be able to share that full circle story with us. And he, while invited on behalf of UNHCR, he is actually from Pennsylvania, and he is a city councilman for the city of Lancaster City. So we'd love to hear your story, but also what led you to do the work that you do now on behalf of refugees and vulnerable populations. And thank you for your public service as well.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, and thank you to the other panelists. It was great hearing from you and your stories. My name is Ahmed. I was born in a refugee camp in the border of Chad and Cameroon. I was born in a latrine. I almost died of malnutrition and malaria as a baby. My grandmother actually sold everything in her house and walked many miles to get me the medicine that I needed to mitigate the malaria. So my father's uncle was Hussein Habre, the former president of Chad. He was deposed in 1990 by a coup. And overnight, our lives got flipped upside down and we became refugees. My family spent 7 years in refugee camps across Central Africa. My sister was born in Niger. I was born in Cameroon. And we spent many years in East Niger, in Difa, in refugee camps before we were resettled to the 300 block of West Grant Street here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Coming to Lancaster, which was at the time the refugee resettlement capital in America. Per capita, we resettled more refugees. It was such a welcoming community that we came to. There was a lot of faith-based organizations, churches, Islamic centers, nonprofits that were doing work to continue that spirit of welcoming, which Lancaster was known for. So growing up, I was always fascinated by welcoming. We had many relatives who would come over. My dad was the oldest of 14, so he helped his other brothers and sisters come to Lancaster as well. And we've kind of formed this community of family and former refugees from Chad here in Lancaster. And growing up, I, attended, high school here in Lancaster, and I went off to college in DC at Howard University. And at Howard, I once again was just so fascinated by all of the different cultures in DC and, all of the different forms of Blackness at Howard University, where, we had many folks from all over Africa, all over the Caribbean, and just the diaspora in total. So I studied political science at Howard, and when I came back to Lancaster, I quickly got involved in community organizing because, again, this welcoming was just it was just my passion. So through my community organizing, I started doing a lot of door-to-door canvassing, working on a few political campaigns, and also working with Church World Service, which I've been a volunteer community organizer with for many years, and also a leader on their immigrant and refugee leadership team. So, at the doors of neighbors, sharing my story about how I came to Lancaster and how I want to give back to a city that did so much for me and my family. We came here with nothing but the clothes on our backs and the copy of a Quran, which we still have at my dad's house here, that we've kept as like a family memento. And, at the doors, sharing my story and talking to other individuals, it got me even more involved. I became a committee person for the Democratic Party here in Lancaster. And that's what led me to apply for a vacancy. There was a vacancy on Lancaster City Council, this past December. And I was selected to fill the vacancy on council. And this past May, I actually won the primary for the special election. So now I am in November, hopefully, God willing, it'll be official that I am an elected city council member here, not just an appointed one. And, it was important for me to, seek public office, not for myself, but so that others who are coming as refugees and immigrants to Lancaster see that they too could be leaders, that government is accessible, and it's important that we have a seat at the table. And also, I wanted to continue our commitment to welcoming here in Lancaster. We were the first welcoming city certified by Welcoming America in Pennsylvania, and we were one of the 7 original welcoming cities in the nation here in the United States. And I was a part of both our certification and our recertification as a welcoming city. And I wanted to make sure that these that this commitment to welcoming was a long-lasting commitment here in Lancaster. So some of the things that I've worked on as a city councilman is making sure that we have language access in city government and at city council meetings. Our city government and our city police can translate into any language. We just actually had a city council meeting celebrating celebrating International Immigrant Heritage Month, as well as World Refugee Day this past Tuesday. And it was great to see us be able to translate into Swahili, Kinyarwanda, Spanish for our neighbors who were able to attend that city council meeting. Many of them, it was the first time they had access to government in the United States. We're also working on affordable housing, which is a crisis across the nation, but we know that it deeply impacts refugee and immigrant families. Many of us come with multi-generational families. We need multi-bedroom units, and it's just becoming more and more unaffordable for immigrants and refugees to find housing. And we know that our communities are better because of welcoming and because of the commitment we make to our refugees. Lancaster has seen economic resilience while many of our neighboring counties and cities have been failing. And even after COVID, we've noticed and we've come to realize that it is true that our cities are better because of refugees and immigrants. Refugees and immigrants are more likely to start a small business. They're our frontline workers, both in the healthcare and hospitality sectors. So we here in Lancaster, we celebrate refugees and immigrants, and being the first former refugee on city council, as well as the first Muslim American on Lancaster City Council, is a testament to that commitment. government. And once again, it shows the next generation of leaders, the next generation of immigrants and refugees that, you can have access to government. You could even be a part of it. And that's very important for refugees and immigrants who many of us left due to political persecution, or we lost the political power in our former homes. But here in our new homes, we don't just, become and live in the shadows, and, we don't just, shy away because of our past traumas. And those who do have that past trauma, it's okay. But as community organizers and as leaders, we need to bring those people to the forefront, allow them to share their stories. And through storytelling, we could build bridges with our new communities, and we could become leaders ourselves. So I'm just very excited to celebrate this World Refugee Day with my neighbors across the country and former refugees and immigrant families, to show them that, we can build what we've lost here in our new homes, and we too can be leaders.
Thank you, Ahmed, for sharing your story as well. Yes, also very moving. And thank you for, reminding us all of the importance of our frontline workers. I know one of the questions that often comes up, and I'll probably pose this to Mandy first, and I invite all those who are listening in on whatever modality and platform to send us your questions as well, for any particular panelists or for the entire group. One of the themes of this year, and was in the opening slide, was around durable solutions. I'm not sure that everyone who's listening in knows exactly what we mean by that. And Mandy, could you speak a bit more about what a durable solution is? Ahmed kind of started alluding to that when he was talking about recertification, workforce development of refugees into the town and municipality where he works. But can you talk about it on a larger scale, what it means?
Yes, sure. It can look very different depending on what level we're talking about. When we're talking, we use the term states, but when we're talking about nations and durable solutions, it's really about policy level decisions that allow more people to resettle, that create easier mechanisms to declare asylum, come and ask for asylum when you cross the border to seek safety. It can be additional pathways, I think of the special immigrant visas that the U.S. has done for Ukrainian refugees or Afghanistan refugees who have helped us in the war, or complementary pathways. If it's universities saying we will pay, we have tuition and room and board for X number of refugees to come and study at our school, and while they're here, they can apply as a refugee for status. So those are some of the durable solutions. For stateless persons, it's really, I think most stateless issues could be eliminated with simple policy decisions. If it's birthright citizenship, if it's, you can claim citizenship now in the country that you've been living in for, however many years, that kind of a thing. But on the ground, when it's refugees resettling or stateless persons trying to, rebuild their life or make a life in a community, at the community level, as Ahmed was saying, it's language access. It's making sure that police, that city service departments, elevators in the building, it's signage that has the language needed for the largest populations in your community, that if it's not permanent, that maybe translation apps or access to things, services like that can help, providing classes in English so that newcomers can learn the language that they'll need to live in and work in, helping their children get into the school system and join classes wherever their education may be, the level they may be at. It's papers and registrations in order to be able to work. In a lot of the United States, particularly, I know globally it can be different, but in the United States, a lot of times you need a driver's license or a car to be able to go somewhere and to go to work every day or to school. Or other transportation solutions. These durable solutions can be many different things. And just because we're individuals here, I'm not the president of the United States, but just because it doesn't mean I can't do anything, right? I can call my congressman, I can call my city council, I can go to the meetings and say that I support some of these policy decisions that help make the pathway easier, or I can volunteer. at, my local congregation or my local English classes and help teach English, help have a conversation. You don't have to be a teacher. You can be somebody that they have a conversation with to help practice. So I think there are many things that we can do, but that's what we mean by durable solutions, are things that make it easier.
Thank you, Mandy, for that explanation for those that were listening in, and also for the reminder that each of us in our individual capacity can do something and make a difference. Both Asila and Ahmed have very compelling stories about their own activism and working within their communities and then broader communities as well. But, we often hear that those who are newly arrived, are sometimes fearful because they've come from places where there's been conflict or they've been persecuted. So I'd love to hear from one or both of you even about, Mandy just spoke about access and what are different elements of access, whether it's language to be able to participate and otherwise. But how do you, mobilize those around you to be more civically engaged and to step into these spaces?
I can take a stab at it, and then Ahmed, if you want to fill in any of the holes that I missed. I think that you're right. When communities first come to the United States, they are assuming that things are going to work exactly like they did in their home country. And so many times they're very fearful. And for the Muslim American community, I would say that we still have a lot of fear in our community in being very civically engaged. And the only way to really conquer that is for them to see that engagement in action. I think one of the most compelling ways to get people involved is to have listening sessions and to understand what the community is in need of. So Mandy mentioned signage, English classes. These are really practical things. And sometimes if you're not in it, you don't understand what is needed. We used to hold many listening sessions for the vulnerable communities. I also worked for affordable housing developer and did a lot of resident services for those that were living in our housing. And sometimes we would overlook things like, oh, there's not enough street lights on the street, and we feel unsafe for when our children come back from their after school activities. It's very simple things. And so when you invite vulnerable communities into a space where they feel welcomed, they feel heard, and you're eliminating the barriers of entry. You're providing childcare. You are providing a stipend for them for their time coming there. You're providing translation services to make sure that they are being heard and that you are understanding them as well. And that you're putting the officials that actually can make these decisions at the table with them. You help them realize that, no, this is really an engaging process and that they are respected as a citizen. And with time, if they actually see that we hold these representatives accountable and that the requests that we make do come true, slowly they're going to realize their engagement is really, really important. So it's really a matter of showing rather than telling.
Yeah, I would agree. And something that we have here in Lancaster through our Church World Service Immigrant and Refugee Program is we have a new Neighbor Speakers Bureau. So we, through the art of storytelling, we get to celebrate and have former refugees and immigrant new arrivals share their stories with organizations, with education groups, with faith-based organizations, and they're mentored and taught the art of storytelling and allowing them to have a way to kind of lift themselves from that trauma through their resettlement journey. And then also, again, being able to build bridges in the community and getting acclimated to their community. And we provide them honorariums as well as coaching and mentorship on how to formulate their stories, write op-eds, call their representatives so that we could have that advocacy from those who we need to hear it from most.
Wonderful. Thank you both for sharing. I think, at the start, we talked about how alarming the crisis is becoming. Mandy shared some stark statistics with us, that we've surpassed the 110 million mark now already mid-year. With Ukraine, now with Sudan, with all of these different both conflicts and natural disasters and otherwise that are pushing people both within their borders as IDPs and across borders as refugees. I want to throw this question out to all of you. It's, something that people are asking is, where do we go from here? The numbers just continue to increase. Where do we go? Because the numbers are growing so big, and the countries that are hosting are becoming overwhelmed. As we talk about durable solutions, you mentioned Canada has now surpassed the US as a resettlement country. There are still some countries that aren't pulling their weight. I know that's part of the December forum that will be happening, so maybe you want to speak a little bit more about that. But how do we encourage more countries to receive and resettle, as well as more peaceful solutions to these many conflicts, so that people can ultimately, those who choose, go back to their countries of origin, where their families and their cultural and religious traditions are?
I can start, but I'm going to end it talking about sort of what we can do individually, and hopefully that will be a jumping off point for Asil or Ahmed. But I think there's no easy answer. I think responsibility sharing is very important in thinking about how we can create solutions that actually makes a dent in some of these numbers, in either helping people return safely or resettling people to new lives. And I talked, like durable solutions, and I talked about what that meant from the national level. But I think it takes will. It takes political will. It takes solidarity. I know what I've seen in my work just in the United States, that the more we talk about it, the more we hear stories from real people, real refugees who have real lived experience and understand what that means. Because I don't know, like, I think of just Americans, everyday Americans in the US, I don't think that everybody knows who refugees are. They hear the news, they hear asylum seekers or migrants on the border. It's like they hear kind of all the bad news and misconceptions. And so for, part of my work here at UNHCR in our office here in DC is about counteracting some of those misconceptions and telling the real story, and making sure that people understand what it is we're talking about and why it's important. Because that's, at least in the US, where the political will comes from, is from the citizens calling their representatives on the phone and bothering them. And then I think individually, I think it's the same, where it's sharing stories, it's talking as allies. If, I'm not a refugee, but I can talk about my work, I can talk about why it's important, I can talk about the people I've met and the things I've seen. And then I think it's also about rebuilding. So we talk a lot about resettlement in the US. And in North America, because we don't have any crises happening in North America, or at least in the US and Canada, but there are crises happening all around the world. And so another thing we have to think about is rebuilding and helping people rebuild. I met some mayors from Ukraine at the City Summit of the Americas a few months ago, and that's what they talked about. They talked about, we're already rebuilding. We are already receiving pledges from more fortunate countries that are helping us rebuild, because people want to come back. They want to go back home where it's comfortable, but and where they know the culture and the language and their families are. But they need safety first. They need it to be safe for them to do so.
I think also part of the solution is the shift in narrative. I think with the war in Ukraine, we may have seen a little bit of a shift in American thinking with the rise of conflict and with the causes of climate change and the crises that are going to be happening. One day you're sitting peacefully at home, and the next day you're packing up 2 pieces of luggage and dragging yourself across the world. And we, I think, assume America is untouchable when it comes to that. When we shift the narrative and say, listen, the more time that passes, the greater chance that these crises are going to come to your doorstep. And when that day comes, and if that day comes, and you need to become a refugee, how would you like to be treated? How would you like to be welcomed? I think we just feel so untouchable. And that shift in narrative, we're like, no one is untouchable. Everything can change for everyone. Look across history and you will see, even Rome collapsed, right? So even you may be a refugee. Think about that. I really think that there needs to be that shift in dialogue.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that we need to further our education efforts to educate the communities here in the United States of what it means to be a refugee. How is that different from an asylee? Because if we leave it up to some of the the disinformation that we see in the media or and shared on social media, I think once we educate folks and once we allow refugees to tell the stories themselves and, empower them to tell the stories themselves, I think that's how we can, shift this narrative and, have people more accepting. In Lancaster, we have a very welcoming community, but you still have people who just simply don't know. And also we need to contact our elected officials. We need to put pressure on those who are in Washington, who are in our state capitals, that they have to represent us, and all of us means all of us, and they need to understand that we as communities have corralled and have welcomed, so we need our partners in Washington to do the same.
Yes, no, thank you. And I think, this element of storytelling that keeps emerging today is really important. So I'm going to put in one more plug for those in the Washington, D.C. area. Again, sorry for those who are not, but I hope there are similar things happening in the states and locales where you live. On June 24th, there is an annual festival in Washington, D.C. on the premises or the grounds of the National Cathedral, and it's called One Journey Festival. Islamic Relief and many other organizations that were named today and many others that weren't are part of that. And it is a celebration of the refugee stories. There's a storytelling tent. There's food and crafts made by refugees. So it's another way for folks to come by and meet a refugee, right? To change that narrative, as well as their advocacy and action tents, of which we have one, to encourage people to reach out to their members of Congress and other ways to get involved. As we're coming to the top of the hour, I want to do one last round robin, and if you have some closing thoughts, whatever moved you today that you heard today, whether it's specifically around World Refugee Day events next week, or just a broader message to those listening today. I'll go in the order that we started. So Mandy, Asil, and then we'll close out with Ahmed.
Yeah, just to say, this is my plug to reach out. My job here at UNHCR is to work with community organizations and great stories of welcoming communities and refugees in those communities who are making a difference, and share that so that we can change the narrative when we can elevate those voices. So reach out if you have a wonderful work happening in your community or your organization, or you have a story to share, because we will find a way to do that.
Thank you, Mandy. And I'm going to piggyback off of that. Part of my role at Islamic Relief is to recruit advocates who want to be part of changing the policies or encouraging the policies that will help refugees. And so if you would like to be an advocate, please reach out to us. I'm assuming all of our contact information is going to be sent out to everyone who's viewed this webinar today. And just to know that you can actually make a difference. You matter. You can hear these stories, be moved by them, and then take that one step further and do something today that could help truly save a life. So thank you so much for having me on again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me here today, and just wanted to thank the other panelists. It was moving to hear your stories. I would just echo what was already stated about, get involved, share your story. We must not live in the shadows, and I would encourage us to find potential leaders in our refugee and immigrant communities and encourage them to run for office as well. It may be scary at first. It may seem like something that is inaccessible, but from somebody who has done it, and now somebody who is encouraging others with refugee and immigrant backgrounds, we need to be visible leaders so that others in our community will come out of the shadows. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. I have a couple of asks as well on behalf of the G20 Interfaith. So, if you listened and you felt moved today, if you're part of a community organization, a faith-based organization, an NGO or otherwise, and you'd like to get more involved in moving this agenda forward, we're always looking for folks to join, as said at the outset, the working group on refugees, displacement, migration, but we have many other working groups around other thematic areas, many which intersect with this topic today as well. So check those out at g20interfaith.org. And this session has been recorded, so we will be sending around the link to those who registered, and we would, encourage you to share it widely if you have colleagues, friends, family that are still learning about this area, and you want to share this link so they can hear it firsthand themselves. We invite you to do so. So on behalf of the G20 Interfaith, thank you to the organizations that participated today, UNHCR, Islamic Relief, our city official, and yeah, go out there not only to vote for policies that help refugees and vulnerable people, but I love Ahmed's closing message, step up and be a candidate and make that change as well. We thank you once again. Happy World Refugee Day next week, if we can say that. I think there are a lot of activities that will show a lot of hope, and we encourage you to find out what's happening in your local community, to get involved not only on World Refugee Day and during World Refugee Week, but beyond. This is an ongoing this year and beyond, so find out how you can become part of the solution. Thank you so much for joining us today.